Good morning. My name is Patricia Lair. I'm a registered dietitian and a long-term care surveyor for the state of Alabama. Today we're going to talk about food safety, because when you go into these facilities you will be observing and surveying the kitchen in the nursing homes. So you need to understand food safety so you know what to look for, so that you understand why you would be writing something up if you needed to. So we're going to be reviewing ServSafe, which is a program put out by the National Restaurant Association, and it's based on the food code, which is put out by the Food and Drug Administration and the USDA. It's a program that almost all restaurants try to participate in, and you'll see the ServSafe logo posted in a lot of restaurants that you go into, along with their health department score. So we're going to go over this so that you have a good basis to understand what you're looking for. All right, keeping food safe is the first section. Has anybody ever had foodborne illness, or what you call food poisoning? Yeah, it's pretty awful. And I've had it 3 times in my life, and I never want to have it again, because you feel like you're going to die, and at some points you actually want to die. That's how bad you feel. A foodborne illness is a disease transmitted to people through food. It's an illness. An illness is considered an outbreak when 2 or more people have the same symptoms after eating the same food. Usually an investigation is conducted by state and local regulatory authorities, and the outbreak is often confirmed by laboratory analysis. Challenges to food safety include time. We're going to be talking a lot about time. Language and culture, literacy and education, pathogens, unapproved suppliers, high-risk customers, and staff turnover. And the cost of foodborne illness is something that some people don't often consider, because if you're running a restaurant and you have a foodborne illness outbreak, you're going to start losing customers. You have your reputation is affected. You have negative media exposure, lowered staff morale. You have lawsuits, legal fees, staff missing work, increased insurance premiums. I mean, it's just a nightmare. Foodborne illnesses occur as a result of contamination usually, and it's either by biological contamination, chemical, or physical. Biological contaminants will include bacteria, viruses, parasites, and fungi, and we'll go into more detail about each of those. Contaminants of a chemical nature would include chemicals, sanitizers, polishes. Physical hazards could include metal shavings, like from the cans, staples, Band-Aids, glass, dirt, and then natural objects like bones, or I'll think of something else in a minute, or maybe even a shell from a peanut or something. 5 risk factors for foodborne illness are purchasing food from unsafe sources, failing to cook food correctly, holding food at incorrect temperatures, using contaminated equipment, and practicing poor personal hygiene. Those are your 5 risk factors, and we're going to go over each one of those. There's time temperature abuse, cross-contamination, poor personal hygiene, poor cleaning and sanitizing. Time temperature abuse, that's when food has stayed too long at temperatures good for pathogen growth. And food has been time temperature abused when it's not been held or stored at a correct temperature. Like, you know, some things you want to keep refrigerated. If it's not cooked or reheated enough to kill pathogens, if you have a leftover, you're going to want to heat it up to a certain temperature. And if it's not cooled correctly, if you have a big pot of something and the edges may be cool, but the internal temperature is not, and that's where your pathogens are going to grow. Cross-contamination, when pathogens are transferred from one surface to food or another. And the biggest cause of cross-contamination is usually human hands. Cross-contamination can cause a foodborne illness when Contaminated ingredients are added to food that receives no further cooking. You have ready-to-eat food that touches contaminated surfaces. Contaminated food touches or drips fluids onto cooked or ready-to-eat food. A food handler touches contaminated food and then touches ready-to-eat food. Or contaminated wiping cloths touch food contact surfaces. Think about when you're at a restaurant and they've got this rag and they're wiping everything down. And you never see it go into a sanitizing solution. That's not good because all they're doing is contaminating the tables from one to another. Okay. Poor personal hygiene can cause a foodborne illness when food handlers fail to wash their hands correctly after using the restroom, if they cough or sneeze on food, if they touch or scratch wounds and then touch food. I mean, think about if you've got like a open cut that's maybe got staph, and you touch that and then you go over here and start slicing the meat. Or if they work while they're sick, especially if they have a virus. Poor cleaning and sanitizing. Equipment and utensils are not washed, rinsed, and sanitized between uses. Food contact surfaces are wiped clean instead of being washed, rinsed, and sanitized. And that's something I want you to remember. Wash, rinse, and sanitize. Kind of like a mantra. Wash, rinse, sanitize. Wiping cloths are not stored in a sanitizer solution between uses. And if the cloth is dry, that's one thing. It can sit out on the counter. But once it gets wet, it needs to be stored in a sanitizing solution when it's not being used. And the other problem would be that sanitizer solutions are not at the required level of concentration to sanitize objects. So those solutions have to be checked periodically. TCS food stands for time, temperature, control food. It used to be called potentially hazardous food. These are things like milk, high protein foods that usually are going to either need to be refrigerated or cooked. Milk, eggs, cheese, meats, poultry, seafood. Also, things that you may not think of, like a potato, a baked potato. Once you cook it, you change the whole situation of the potatoes. It's no longer something you can just store in a cool area. Once you cook it, you've started to break down the cells. Things like rice, that has to be kept at a proper temperature. If it's dry rice before it's cooked, it's fine to keep on the shelf. But once you've cooked it, it's got to be either kept hot or refrigerated. Bean sprouts, especially alfalfa sprouts. Fruits. Now, you've probably heard of some things in the news lately about like cut melons and things like that. If you think about it, when you slice a melon, whatever's on the outside is going onto that surface of the melon that you cut with a knife. So, one, you'd want to wash the outside of the melon, but two, once you've sliced it, there's still potential there, so you want to keep it cool. And some infused oils can also be a problem. Ready-to-eat food is food that can be eaten without further preparation, washing, or cooking. That might be bread. It could be a salad, that's ready to go. Ready-to-eat food includes cooked food, washed fruit and vegetables, whole and cut, deli meat, bakery items, like those little Debbie cakes, sugar, spices, seasoning. These people have a higher risk of getting a foodborne illness, as I'm sure you're aware. Preschool-aged children, elderly people, or people with compromised immune systems. And in nursing homes, that could easily be two of the three. They might have a compromised immune system and be elderly. So that's why we're very careful in a nursing home. You want to focus on keeping food safe by purchasing from approved, reputable suppliers, and we'll get people that have been inspected, that aren't just something where you're going to buy on the side of the road, okay? Controlling time and temperature, preventing cross-contamination, practicing personal hygiene, and cleaning and sanitizing. All right. Now that's section 1. Do you have any questions of the overview? Okay. All right. All right, now we want to talk about contamination, food allergens, and foodborne illness. Physical contaminants. Your sources are going to be common objects that get into food. It could be metal shavings from a can when you use a can opener. Wood can get in there. Fingernails, especially false fingernails. I had a customer that got a fake fingernail served on his ice cream cone. And that's just not good. Staples, bandages, glass, jewelry, dirt, naturally occurring objects such as fruit pits, bones, especially if you've got something like you're making pureed chicken. I had a lady that she deboned the chicken, but a piece of bone was still attached, was in there, and it got pureed. So you would not want to, you'd have to throw that whole puree away. There's no way you could serve that because it'd be just very sharp pieces of bone that could really be harmful. So symptoms could be, mild to serious injuries, cuts, dental damage, choking, bleeding. You want to, of course, purchase food from approved, reputable suppliers, but things can still happen. And you want to closely inspect any food received, and as you're preparing it, they have to be looking for that. Okay. Chemical contaminants. Sources may be cleaners, sanitizers, polishes, machine lubricants, pesticides, which is one reason why you want to keep all that stuff stored away from the kitchen, away from the food production area of the kitchen. Certain types of kitchenware and equipment, things like made from pewter, copper, zinc, and some types of painted pottery can actually be leached into the food, especially if you have like an acidic food. Like they had a case where they used a brand new clean garbage can to serve lemonade out of, and people got sick because the acidity from the lemon drew that metal into the drink. Deodorizers for first aid products and health and beauty products, even hand lotions, hairsprays, etc. You don't want to get that into the food. Symptoms can vary depending on the chemical consumed. Most illnesses occur within minutes. Vomiting and diarrhea are typical. If the illness is suspected from a chemical contaminant, you do need to call the emergency number and consult the MSDS. That's your Materials Safety Data Sheet. Y'all are familiar with those. In each kitchen, you'll see an MSDS, and hopefully it's arranged in some kind of logical order in there, so if they have to look something up, they can look it up. I've seen some that are like this thick, and it's pages and pages and pages, and there's like no organization. So you would just, if you've got an emergency happening, you're going to have a problem. That's not exactly a tag, but you might want to mention that sometimes if you see that issue. You only want to use chemicals approved for use in food service operations. You want to purchase chemicals, again, from approved suppliers. Store chemicals away from the prep areas, from the food storage areas and the service areas. Chemicals must be separated from food and food contact surfaces by spacing and partitioning. Chemicals must never be stored above food or food contact surfaces, and you want to use chemicals for their intended use and follow the manufacturer's directions. You might see, usually most things are going to be stored in the chemical storeroom unless they're being used to clean. You never want to see, most cleaning's done, heavy-duty cleaning's done, most of the food is put away. The reason why you would want to make sure that you keep your food and your cleaning materials separate from your food would be, say you have staff that English is not their primary language. Maybe they can't read. If you look at a bottle of degreaser, it may look very similar to a bottle of lemonade mix. Okay? And when people clean things like if you use urn cleaner in a coffee pot, you want to make sure that's cleared, because sometimes you can taste it if it hasn't been. You don't want to have things like your sanitizers should not be stored above where your food prep is. They can be stored underneath, but not above, because if it falls over, that could negatively affect things like lettuce and any other food that you're cooking or prepping. But at the same time, you want to have that food sanitizer right there so you can put your wiping cloths in it. But so it has to be underneath. Okay, underneath the food service prep area. Okay. Preventions. Only handle food with equipment and utensils approved for food service use. Make sure the manufacturer labels on the original chemical containers are readable. And that's another thing, when you get these spray bottles, they used to have like these little spray bottles, and you'd have a spray bottle, you wouldn't know what was in it. Now the manufacturers are coming up with spray bottles with labels on it, so it's clear what's in there, what should be in there. Keep the MSDS current, and they're supposed to be accessible to staff at all times, and to follow the manufacturer's directions and requirements when throwing out chemicals. Well, some people can deliberately contaminate food. It has happened. I've heard of it happening in some places. It's rare, but some people do it on purpose. So that's why you want to keep control of your kitchen. You want to assure, look, employees, reports, and threats for alert. Make sure the products received are from safe sources. Monitor the security of products in the facility. Know who is in your facility. Keep information related to food defense accessible, and develop a plan for responding to suspicious activity or a threat to the operation. Food allergens. That's going to be a protein in a food or ingredient some people are sensitive to. And these proteins will occur naturally, and when enough of an allergen is eaten, an allergic reaction can occur, as I'm sure y'all are aware. Allergy symptoms can include nausea, wheezing or shortness of breath, hives or itchy rashes, swelling of various parts of the body, including the face, eyes, hands, or feet, vomiting and or diarrhea, abdominal pain. Symptoms can become serious quickly, and a severe reaction called anaphylaxis can lead to death. The big 8 food allergens are milk, eggs, fish such as bass, flounder, and cod, crustaceans, shellfish including lobster, shrimp, and crab, wheat, soy, peanuts, and tree nuts such as almonds, walnuts, and pecans. So basically, reading the food labels is the most important thing. And the service staff need to be able to describe menu items to guests and identify any allergens in the item. And in a nursing home situation, you're going to know if somebody's allergic to something, or should know that someone's allergic to something. But the staff is going to have to be able to make sure that those allergens do not reach the resident. Some things like specialty products, like nutritional products, might have, like there was a Jell-O, a nutritional Jell-O, high-protein Jell-O. It had egg albumin in it. Well, if someone's allergic to eggs, you don't normally think of Jell-O as having eggs in it. So this happened in a hospital I was working in. patient asks the food service worker, well, this doesn't have eggs in it, does it? She said, oh, you don't have eggs in Jell-O. Well, he had a reaction. But luckily it was okay. But now the kitchen staff, when they're back in there, they don't want to have any cross contact with an allergen food, with the other foods that a person who with allergies is going to be eating. Like you wouldn't use the same fryer oil to cook someone's French fry who's allergic to fish if you just cook fish in that fryer oil the day before. And you don't want to put food on surfaces that have touched the allergens. Like if you've been chopping up pecans on this thing, you don't want to be coming back and slicing up someone's salad. Kitchen staff have to avoid cross contact. They have to check the recipes, ingredient labels, wash, rinse, and sanitize cookware. I mean, even the serving utensils you've got to be careful with. Wash hands and change gloves before prepping food. Personal hygiene and contamination. Managers really have to focus on establishing personnel hygiene policies, and you will have a personnel hygiene policy that you can ask for, because and it will address the uniform, it'll address when they wash their hands, it'll address jewelry, things like that. So if you have any chewing, no eating in the kitchen, no chewing gum, smoking, doing stuff or any of that stuff in the kitchen. Training food handlers on personal hygiene policies and retraining them regularly is important, and modeling correct behavior on the part of the manager is important. And they have to supervise, make sure things are going correctly as far as personal hygiene policies when laws or science change. Food handlers can contaminate food when they have a foodborne illness, when they have symptoms such as diarrhea, vomiting, or jaundice, when they have wounds that does contain a pathogen, sneezing or coughing, having contact with a person who's sick, and touching anything that may contaminate their hands, and then they don't wash their hands. Actions that can contaminate food: scratching the scalp, running fingers through the hair, wiping or touching the nose, rubbing an ear, touching a pimple or infected wound, wearing a dirty uniform, coughing or sneezing into the hand, or spitting in the operation. Good personal hygiene includes following hygienic hand practices, maintaining personal cleanliness, wearing clean and appropriate clothing, restraining hair and removing jewelry. The thing about jewelry is, one thing, some places will allow them to wear, like small earrings, but if you have like dangling earrings, that can be a safety hazard for them. Plus the fact that some of those stones can fall out and into the food and be a physical hazard. The biggest thing though is that we're concerned about is your hands. Like they could wear a wedding band. The food code allows a plain wedding band, but not something with stones in it, because that's going to be a place for germs and to hide and bacteria to grow. Dirt. And then things like any kind of bracelet. Sometimes you get by with a watch, but the bracelet is, if it hangs down, like I saw a lady making meatloaf one time. She was wearing gloves, but she had a bracelet on. And she was in there with the raw meat, doing all that stuff with the bracelet. So naturally, that's going to be a cross-contamination issue. You want to avoid unsanitary habits and actions, maintaining good health, covering wounds, reporting health issues, all important things. I know y'all know how to wash hands. You will be surprised at how sometimes people wash their hands, though. I remember a guy, he was going from one end of the dish machine to the other, and he just came up and just let the water run over his hands, and then went and started getting off the clean dishes after being in the dirty side. So washing hands and arms using running water as hot as they can comfortably stand. Should be at least 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Applying soap enough to build up a good lather. Scrubbing hands and arms vigorously. Scrubbing for 10 to 15 seconds. And cleaning under the fingernails and between the fingers. Rinse hands and arms thoroughly under running warm water. And dry hands and arms using a single-use paper towel or hand dryer. Actually, single-use paper towel I think is better, because then you can use that paper towel to turn off the handles of the sink. And I like using a paper towel to get me out of the bathroom, for that matter. But even if they have been in the bathroom, they've washed their hands in the bathroom, when they get back in the kitchen, they should wash their hands. When y'all go in the kitchen, you need to be sure to model good behavior. You wash your hands. Now, the trick's going to be, you've got this computer you're carrying. So, some people, I mean, they're using the overhead tables. You can put it on. They may come up with something else, but you're going to want to wash your hands, okay? And think about, what you're doing when you do that. And obviously, you're not going to be. You try to touch as little in the kitchen as possible, but you will touch some things. So you want to have clean hands, like the door handle to the refrigerator. You've got to open that. When to wash hands? Food handlers must wash their hands before they start work and after. After they're using the restroom, after they've handled raw meat, poultry, and seafood, both before and after. Touching hair, face, or body. Sneezing, coughing, or using a tissue. Eating, drinking, smoking, or chewing gum or tobacco. Now, you don't want to see any chewing gum or tobacco or cigarettes or cigars or whatever in the kitchen. Because if you think about it, when you're smoking that hand-to-mouth action, also when you're blowing out that smoke, you're carrying out things from your respiratory system, almost like a sneeze. You also, chewing, your spittle can come out, and it's just not. And besides being unattractive, it can contaminate the food, or be a physical hazard if you start laughing and it comes out and lands on the mashed potatoes, whatever. After you've handled chemicals, you want to wash your hands. If it's going to affect food safety, if you put into your rag and the sanitizer, and then wipe down the counter, I'm not so worried about that. But if you're using a degreaser, yes, you definitely want to wash your hands. Or after they mop the floor, that's when you go from one task to another, you should be washing their hands. Or from soiled to dirty. Dirty to clean. You want to be washing your hands. I remember I watched this one man, he was running the dishwasher pretty much by himself, and he considered that one task. So he was going from the clean side to the dirty, which is okay, but then he went from the dirty to the clean. And he did all the stuff. He even broke down the dirty side and cleaned it up and everything before he washed his hands. And he was thinking that was one task. But between tasks, but especially between dirty to clean, you absolutely have to wash your hands. Food handlers must wash their hands after they take out the garbage. In fact, when we go out to the dumpster and then we come back in the kitchen, you want to wash your hands, even if you haven't touched the dumpster. But usually I've touched the dumpster because I've looked in there, Clearing tables or busting dirty dishes. Do y'all see that sometimes when you go in a restaurant and the waitress is cleaning the table and then she brings out your food, but she may or may not have washed her hands. Touching clothing or aprons, handling money, leaving and returning to the kitchen prep area, handling service animals or aquatic animals, touching anything else that may contaminate hands. Handling money, I think of one illustration. I don't know if y'all have seen these toasters that are like, they have like a conveyor belt type action to them. Let's say it's a commercial toaster. And between, like at lunchtime, this one kitchen was using it as a cash register. They were putting money in the tray of the toaster. And I'm like going, this is not good, to pay for employee meals. And I'm thinking, I mean, that's contaminating the toaster, because money is one of the most dirty things you can handle, because it's gone through all sorts of pans. So you kind of bear this kind of stuff in mind when I doubt that you'll ever see that, but you no telling what you'll see. So just kind of bear that kind of stuff. Think about it. Hand antiseptics. Liquids or gels used to lower the number of pathogens on skin. Now, if they use them, they must comply with the CFR and FDA standards, and should only be used after hand washing. Hand antiseptics are not a substitute for hand washing in the kitchen. I can't say that enough. In fact, I don't even want, to be honest, I really don't even want to see antiseptics in there, because I'm afraid the employees will get confused and use that instead of washing their hands. And they must, they have to be allowed to dry before you start touching food or equipment anyway. Okay, hand care. Fingernails should be kept short and clean. They should not be wearing false nails, and they should not be wearing nail polish. The false nails is because they can pop off. Look with ice cream. I mean, that literally happened. And if you're wearing nail polish, if it gets cracked or starts peeling off, that can wind up in the food. Also, the cracks in the nail polish can hide bacteria. Now, they have, I don't know if they go into this, the food code will allow this if you're wearing gloves all the time. But to me, you're just asking for trouble. And you're going to be changing, and you need to be changing your gloves. That's another thing, is sometimes people put gloves on, they just think, oh, well, I've got gloves on. Not thinking that they've all the stuff they've touched in between. It's just, I'll tell you this one story about about gloves. I walked into the cafeteria, from the cafeteria into the kitchen. I was looking for the cook. It was a new guy, because we needed something on the cafeteria line. And I didn't see him, so I'm looking around, and I see he comes in from the hallway. I said, oh, good, we need so-and-so. I said, and I noticed, he didn't stop to wash his hands or anything. He was wearing gloves. I said, where were you? Oh, I went to the restroom. And I went, and when did you wash your hands? And he went, oh, I'm wearing gloves. I'm like going, no. So we had a discussion. So he just hadn't thought about it. It was like the gloves were like this magical things to protect from everything. And some people just don't think about it. They just think, well, I've got gloves on. I'm good. So. Anyway, moving along. Hand care. Infected wounds or cuts can contain pus, and they must be covered to prevent pathogens from contaminating food and food contact surfaces. How a wound is covered depends on where it's located. If it's on the hand or the wrist, you have to have an impermeable cover, like a bandage or a finger cot, and then a single-use glove. You want to cover wounds on the arm with an impermeable cover, such as a bandage, and to cover wounds on other parts of the body with a dry, tight-fitting bandage. bare hand contact with ready-to-eat food. Bare hand contact with ready-to-eat food must be avoided unless the food is an ingredient in a dish that does not contain raw meat, fish, or poultry, and the dish will be cooked to at least 145 degrees Fahrenheit. Or if the food is an ingredient in a dish containing raw meat, seafood, or poultry, the dish will be cooked to the required internal minimum temperature of the raw item. Like if it's poultry, it would be cooked to 165 degrees Fahrenheit minimum. And you never handle ready-to-eat food with bare hands when you serve a primarily high-risk population, which would be a nursing home. Single-use gloves should be used when handling ready-to-eat food, except when washing produce, and except when handling ready-to-eat ingredients for a dish that will be cooked to the correct temperature. Must never be used in place of hand washing and must never be washed and reused. And I have seen that tried too, where people they didn't have enough sinks in the kitchen. Is what the problem was. They didn't have a sink in the dish room, and they had one person trying to wash dishes. See, usually if you have two people in the dish room, you're okay because you have one person on the clean side, one person on the dirty side. You know, never the twain shall mix. So she was going from the dirty side to the clean side, and she had her gloves on, and she dipped them into a solution of sanitizer, thinking that was okay. No, that's not okay. No, that's not hand washing. So, and you're supposed to have a hand washing sink for hand washing, a designated hand washing sink. Okay, and the hand washing sink is not supposed to be used for cleaning food service materials either. It's supposed to be used for hand washing, vice versa. Single-use gloves. Wash hands before putting gloves on when starting a new task. Of course, use the right size. Hold gloves by the edge when putting them on. And once the gloves are on, you shouldn't have any rips or tears in them. Do not blow into the gloves. Do not roll gloves to make them easier to put on. When to change gloves. As soon as they become dirty or torn, before beginning a different task, after an interruption such as taking a phone call, after handling raw meat, seafood, or poultry, and before handling ready-to-eat food. So if you're doing one task and you could change your gloves. If you're still doing the same task, you might just be able to put more gloves on, but it depends on what's going on. If you've been doing that task for 4 hours, I would think you'd want to go ahead and wash your hands and then put on fresh gloves. But if it came torn, you could maybe put a fresh glove on. As long as you're doing the same task. Like for example, running the tray line. Like they would be running that tray line and they may be wearing gloves. You can run a tray line without wearing gloves if you're using utensils, right? But if you have gloves on and say you got mashed potatoes on it, you could take that off and put a fresh glove on right then because you're doing the same task. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Correct work attire. They're supposed to wear a clean hat or other hair restraint. Wear clean clothing daily. Remove aprons when leaving the food preparation area. Why would you wear your apron to the restroom? No. That's just not a good idea. Remove jewelry from hands and arms before prepping food or when working around prep areas. Food handlers must not eat, drink, smoke, or chew gum or tobacco for obvious reasons, which we've discussed. Now, on the eating and the drinking, there are a couple of exceptions there. The health department will allow a cup that's covered with a straw. that they can, and a lot of times the kitchen will have a certain area where you can put that. You can't just have it anywhere. But they can drink from that. Eating, you're not really eating. You can do a taste plate or taste, it's like a small, like you taste your food. You don't, like I remember seeing one commercial, I couldn't believe they showed this on television. I was like, you're kind of insane. It was like a commercial kitchen, and this lady took up a spoon and tasted and put it back in the pot. You don't do that. That is no, don't do that. What you do is you get your spoon, you put a taste in a little bowl, and then you have or you use a single-use spoon, and then you throw that away or put it to be washed. You're not reusing that spoon because the minute it hits your mouth, it's contaminated. But you do need to taste stuff. But tasting stuff for flavor or to see, if it's got the right composition for taste palate is different than sitting there and eating rice while you're cooking soup. Does that make sense? Okay, all right. Let's see. So, must not eat, drink, smoke, or chew gum or tobacco when prepping or serving food, when working in prep areas, or when working in areas used to clean utensils and equipment, as in the dish room or pot and pan room. They're supposed to report health issues if they have a sore throat with a fever. The food handler should be restricted from working around food, and they might be able to put them somewhere else, but if you are using a high-risk population, they really shouldn't be in the kitchen. And if the food handler has at least one of these symptoms, vomiting or diarrhea, then they should be excluded from the operation. They shouldn't be coming to work if they're throwing up and having diarrhea. They must have had no symptoms for at least 24 hours before they come back to work, or have a written release from a medical practitioner. If they have jaundice, then you need to report that food handler to the regulatory authority, to the health department. You want to exclude food handlers from the operation if they have jaundice, and food handlers must have a written release from a medical practitioner and approval from the regulatory authority before returning to work. Because that's like hepatitis A, right? Reporting health issues. The food handler is vomiting or has diarrhea and has been diagnosed with an illness caused by one of these pathogens, such as non-typhoidal salmonella, Shiga toxin-producing E. coli, norovirus, or Shigella SPP. Then you definitely have to exclude from the operation and work with the food handler's medical practitioner and or the regulatory authority to decide when they can come back to work. Again, if they've been diagnosed with something like hepatitis A or Salmonella typhi, you're going to exclude them from the operation and work with their medical practitioner and or the regulatory authority before they can come back to work. And they should have a policy regarding that as far as illness for food service workers. And the food service workers should know that if they are sick like that, that they, at least, if they've got vomiting and diarrhea, you could ask them, like, should you come to work if you have vomiting and diarrhea? And they'll say no, hopefully. You have to let the manager know. Any questions about that? Okay. Yes.
On the food handler that was preparing the meatloaf with her bracelet, would that be a tag or?
Yeah. What you'd be doing is you'd be watching that. And what I did was I watched her. I mean, I wasn't right by her, but I'm watching her. And what you want to do is the fact that the things you would do, you make your observation. Mm-hmm. You've got observation, interview, record review. Mm-hmm. All right, so for the observation, I'm seeing her do this, and I'm observing that bracelet is dangling and getting into the meat, mm-hmm. or touching the meat. So I'm watching that. Then I'm watching you know, after she gets done with that, even if she washes her hands and changes gloves, you still have that bracelet there, and she's gone off to do another task, right? So you would observe that, and you're timing stuff and observing what's happening. Then you're going to interview her and ask her, I noticed, you know, you were wearing your bracelet while you're making meatloaf. What would be the problem with that? What's the potential problem with that? And usually they can tell you. She just didn't probably think about it. And then you're going to ask for that personal hygiene policy, because it's going to tell you that they're not supposed to be wearing jewelry around the wrist. All right, we're going to talk about the flow of food. Just thinking about how food flows through a kitchen operation. You want to keep food safe throughout the flow of food. And when I say flow of food, when it comes in through the back door to when it goes to the refrigeration or the storage room, and then it goes into the preparation area, then you cook it, then you serve it, then it's, well, actually you hold it and then you serve it, and then it's the cleanup, the whole, and any leftovers that are going to be reused. All that stuff's considered in the flow of food. Even going out to the garbage. I mean, that's all considered. You want to keep food safe throughout the flow of food. You want to prevent cross-contamination, and you want to prevent time-temperature abuse. You want to use separate equipment for each type of food. You want to clean and sanitize all work surfaces, equipment, and utensils after each task. Now, the separate equipment thing. They have a program right now where they're using different colored cutting boards. Now, to me, as long as you properly clean, wash, rinse, and sanitize this cutting board, I don't see the big deal. But, so you know what it is, I'm going to tell you. They have green is for raw produce. Yellow is for raw poultry. Red is for raw meats, like your beef, lamb, pork. White is for your cooked meat. So you can have this rainbow of cutting boards up there. But to me, the most important thing is wash, rinse, and sanitize. Now, over time, those plastic cutting boards, if they're used a lot, they'll, you start getting grooves in there. It's harder to clean. That's really when they need to throw them away. But that would be when maybe the color coating would be more helpful. But it's still, all the equipment needs to be washed, rinsed, and sanitized so you can use it. But you'll see those colored cutting boards, and you need to be aware of it. Let's see. Preventing cross-contamination. You want to be prepping food at different times. Like you want to prepare raw meat, fish, and poultry at different times when you're doing ready-to-eat food. Like if you're using the same prep table, you might want to cut up your vegetables ahead of time first. You don't want to be having one person on this one table. Say we had this half a table. You'll see some pretty small prep tables. If you had one person over here cutting up pieces of chicken, and you have the other person over here doing your salad, that's just too close, because you can see splatter occurring. And when you buy prepared, this is just a tip they have that you might want to use. Buy food items that don't require much prepping or handling. But if you buy prepared food, you're dependent on what those people did. Did they prep it correctly? I mean, did they use proper cross-contamination measures? You want to avoid time-temperature abuse. Time-temperature food held in the range of 41 degrees Fahrenheit and 135 degrees Fahrenheit has been temperature abused, depending on how long it's been in that temperature danger zone. food has been time temperature abused whenever it's handled in the following ways: when it's cooked to the wrong internal temperature, when it's held at the wrong temperature, or when it's cooked or reheated incorrectly. All right. And to avoid time temperature abuse, you want to monitor your time and temperature. Some people actually write stuff down. You probably won't see all. You'll see some of that. You want to make sure you'll see like internal temps where they've cooked it to a certain internal temperature. You may see that. You'll definitely see a steam table hot holding temperature for sure. You want to make sure the correct kinds of thermometers are available and regularly record temperatures and the times they're taken. Minimize the time that food spends in the temperature danger zone, and take corrective action if time temperature standards are not met. This is a bimetallic stem thermometer. You should have been issued one of these. You'll notice that there's a blue mark on there that says 32 degrees, and that's where, when you get ready to calibrate your thermometer, you're going to put it in ice water bath when it's like 50% water. Well, actually more ice than it's like a slush is ideally what you want to see: crushed ice and some water. So because 32 degrees is the freezing point of water. Think about that. You know, when the weatherman says it's going to be 32 degrees tonight, we're going to have some freezing. So you put the bottom part, there's a dimple about right here. And they show you on that. That's your sensing area right there. So that at least that part should be in the water. And then there's a nut underneath there. And you have to, if you're going to adjust it, if it doesn't go down to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, because this thing is in Fahrenheit, and it's each little hash is 2 degrees. Okay, because if you start looking at it, you can see it's each mark is 2 degrees. And that's important because when you start trying to get down to 135 or 138 or whatever it is when you're reading the thermometer. But you can adjust the needle to 32 degrees Fahrenheit by adjusting that nut underneath there. I have to use a little wrench or a pliers or something to do it. The little red sleeve that your thermometer comes in, you can move the part down to the end, and that turns into a little wrench. Or you can also use that to hold the thermometer, so you're not having to hold your thermometer right over a steaming pan of food and burning your fingers. So you have almost like a little handle. But you have to be careful that you don't mess up your thermometer. It's easier if you actually hold it and do it. So I recommend playing with it and seeing what I'm talking about. Because you do want to have a thermometer that is correctly calibrated. And you need to do it so that you can observe, when you observe them calibrating their thermometer, that you realize that they know what they're doing. A lot of the directions for calibrating thermometers they use both Fahrenheit and centigrade. And people get confused because when you calibrate it to a centigrade temperature, you're calibrating it to 0 degrees centigrade. Well, they see that 0 degrees centigrade, and they're thinking 0 degrees Fahrenheit, which is going to throw it off, right? So your temperatures are not valid. So you do need to kind of look at that. Am I making sense to y'all on that? I can show you later also. But anyway, choosing the correct thermometer. A lot of people use this bimetallic stem thermometer. They also use the new ones that have an electronic readout, and it's basically it's based on a battery, And as long as your battery's good, I mean, you can check it, you can check to make sure it's registering 32 degrees Fahrenheit in ice water to make sure it's working correctly. But it's a slush. It's not just water, because a lot of times people put ice in a glass, then they put warm water in it, and it's melting half the ice. So that's not going to be a real slush, is it? So you really want like 50% or more of ice in that cup with cold water. All right, choosing the correct thermometer. You want to measure the temperature through a metal probe. Display temperatures digitally is one way, which we just mentioned. Sometimes they'll have interchangeable probes. Usually what you're going to see is a bimetallic thermometer, stem thermometer, or a digital thermometer. You may see a laser thermometer. And all that's measuring is the surface temperature, which is great if you're checking things in from an inventory point of view. But as far as checking your hot food temperatures, that's not really the best. I've seen it used before. They stirred the food up and then checked it that way, but normally that's not really a good way to go. So, okay. The infrared laser thermometers measures the surface temperature of food and equipment. You have to really remove anything between the thermometer and the food. Then you have time temperature indicators, TTI, which monitors both time and temperature. And that's something that the supplier puts on a package. And the color change indicates that time temperature abuse has occurred somewhere in the delivery process, usually. So you know not to accept it if it's off color. Maximum registering thermometer is one that indicates the highest temperature reached during use. And that would be something like if you have, when you're checking the temperature of a dish machine, sometimes they'll send like a thermometer like that through with the tray, and they'll know what the highest temperature was in there. We talk about calibration, means adjusting a thermometer to get a correct reading. There are two methods. There's the ice point method, and then there's the boiling point method. And the safer of the two is the ice point method. If you're doing the boiling point method, you have to bring tap water to a boil in a deep pan. You have to put the thermometer stem probe into the water and adjust the thermometer while the thermometer is in that boiling water to 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And the caveat here is that the boiling point of water varies according to elevation. So it's just, just too many things on that. So the ice point method is fairly easy to use, fairly safe. You fill a large container with crushed ice and water. You put the thermometer stem probe into the water and adjust the thermometer until it reads 32 degrees Fahrenheit, 0 degrees Fahrenheit centigrade. So you can see how people can get confused right there, especially if they haven't been doing it on a regular basis. They should be calibrating that thermometer, ideally at least once a day, and usually before each meal, but at least once a day. Okay. But that thermometer has to be in that ice water when you're adjusting, if you have to calibrate it. Now if it's going to 32 degrees, you're good. No problem. General thermometer guidelines. They should be washed, rinsed, sanitized, and air dried before and after using them. That does not necessarily mean sending them through the dish machine. I would, they need to be hand washed, and they should be calibrated before each shift to ensure accuracy. There are usually just 2 shifts in the kitchen, but you could do it before each meal. Make sure thermometers are used to measure the temperature of food that are accurate to plus or minus 2 degrees Fahrenheit. And only use glass thermometers if they're enclosed in a shatterproof casing. The only time I really see glass thermometers is when they're doing candy making, and it's inside a shatterproof casing. All right. When you're using the thermometer, you want to insert the stem into the thickest part of the product, usually the center, and then take another reading in a different spot. Like with chicken. If you were checking for the internal temperature of chicken, you might check in the breast and then check in the thigh. And you want to wait for the thermometer reading to steady before recording the temperature. It's the flow of food, purchasing, and receiving. You, of course, again, you want to purchase from approved, reputable suppliers that have been inspected and can show an inspection report. They need to meet applicable local, state, and federal laws. And you want to arrange deliveries so that they arrive when staff has enough time to do inspections and when they can be correctly received. I think sometimes suppliers may take advantage of some of our little nursing homes when they deliver right in the middle of lunch. You know, it's just, unless they've got someone. Usually they have special days that they have deliveries, and they usually staff for someone to be there, check those things in. You want to make sure specific staff is responsible. You want to train them to look for correct temperatures, expired code dates, signs of thawing and refreezing, pest damage, and they should be allowed to accept, reject, and sign for deliveries. And plan ahead for shipments. You want to visually inspect truck for signs of contamination. Check for damaged food, sample temperatures, inspect and store each delivery before inspecting another. Of course, everybody shows up at the same time. That's what happens. But we don't have to worry about this because they're not going to be delivering after hours, usually. Rejecting deliveries. You want to separate rejected items from accepted items and tell the delivery person what's wrong with the item, get a sign adjustment, all that stuff, log it. If there's a recall, that's something you might run into. They need to identify which are the recalled food items, remove them from inventory, and place them in a secure and appropriate location. Label them, store them separately from food, utensils, equipment, linens, single-use items. Inform staff not to use a product, and determine what to do with those items. Usually they're going to either report them, throw them away, whatever. Checking the temperature of meat and poultry and fish. You want to insert the thermometer stem into the thickest part of the food. That's in the days when we used to get like chicken delivered in ice, which you hardly ever see that anymore. It's usually IQF frozen in a box. But you can, a lot of things you may want to be, like put it between packaging. If you have something that's like wrapped in Cryovac, I call it, or reduced oxygen packaging food, bulk food, you don't want to break into the package, but you can put two packages together and do it that way. Some things like milk. Now this is something you might actually wind up doing. To check the temperature of milk, the package, the carton, you're going to sacrifice a carton of milk. Okay, you open up the carton and the probe goes inside that opening into the milk. That's the way you're supposed to do it. In the past, we used to accept when they would have the carton of milk and you just stick that thermometer in there, straight in. But CMS doesn't want us to do it that way anymore. They want us to open it up and put it in that way. Okay? That way you can make sure that the sensing area is fully immersed into the liquid and you're not touching the package with the stem of the probe. Okay. Receiving temperature requirements. Cold TCS food should be 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower unless specified. And there are some exceptions. Hot TCS food should be 135 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. Now you say, why would we be checking hot time temperature control food? If you have a central kitchen and you're sending it someplace else. Say you've got a central kitchen in one area of town and they're sending bulk hot food to a satellite kitchen. Frozen food we go with this, it should be frozen solid. Like if you go in the freezer, the temperatures probably should be around 0 degrees. If it's ice cream, it should be colder than that. But is it frozen solid? That's what as a surveyor, that's what you're looking for. Is it frozen solid? So you would like pick up that ice cream container and feel it. Is it solid or is it given? Is that package of French fries, is it mushy or is it frozen solid? Okay. Live shellfish, which I don't think you're going to see that much, but if you did, the air temperature should be 45 degrees Fahrenheit, and the internal temperature should be less than or equal to 50 degrees Fahrenheit when it's delivered. And once received, it has to be cooled to an internal temperature of 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower in 4 hours. I really don't think you're going to see that in the nursery home. You might. Shucked shellfish, again, I don't think, we're going to skip that part. Milk, 45 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. You hear that, 45 degrees Fahrenheit or lower when it's delivered. But it must be cooled to an internal temperature of 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower within 4 hours. So if they just got a delivery of milk and you walk in right after that and the milk is 45 degrees Fahrenheit, you're going to want to know when that milk got delivered, especially if you go in the morning, because within 4 hours it has to get down to 41 degrees. Shell eggs should have an air temperature of 45 degrees Fahrenheit or lower when they're delivered. Okay. Receiving and inspecting packaged items should be rejected if they have tears, holes, or punctures. Cans should be rejected that are swollen, rusty, or severely dented. Bloating or leaking of ROP food. Broken cartons or seals, dirty or discolored packaging. If the packaging is discolored, especially if you're talking about something like a bag of flour, that could indicate that it got wet and dried, and that would mean it was contaminated with whatever was being carried by that water. Leaks, dampness, or water stains, signs of pests or pest damage, like you might see webbing. I remember when I bought a package of my favorite cookie pinwheels. And I opened them up, and it had all this webbing in there. It was like insects had gotten in there. And I was like, ah! So expired use by or expiration dates, especially with dairy products, like sour cream, cottage cheese, milk. If you do not want to accept it if the expiration date is there or already passed. And if it's expired and in the refrigerator, they need to have gotten rid of it by that day. Okay? Before the end of that day. Like if it was pimento cheese and it expired today, by tomorrow it should not be in there. It should be thrown out tonight before they leave. Any evidence of tampering. Shellfish, if by chance they're using shellfish, they must be received with shell stock identification tags, and they must be kept on file for 90 days. from the date the last shellfish was used from that delivery container. So they can track it back to wherever it was gotten if somebody gets sick. Because that tag indicates when and where the shellfish were harvested. Oh boy, I don't think we're going to see this, but fish that's going to be eaten raw or partially cooked you got to have see documentation that was correctly frozen before being received, and you have to again keep those documents for 90 days. Farm-raised fish must have documentation stating that the fish was raised to FDA standards, and you want to keep those documents for 90 days from the sale of the fish or use of the fish. Inspection stamps. Meat and poultry must have a USDA or State Department of Agriculture stamp. That stamp indicates that the product and processing plant have met certain standards. That's the USDA stamp. Now, grading is different. Like with meats, grading has to do with, like with beef, it has to do with marbling. If it's, prime, choice, standard, whatever. But the USDA stamp has to do with food safety. Egg products. Liquid, frozen, and dehydrated eggs must also have a USDA inspection stamp. And then grading stamps are voluntary. That's like the prime, choice, whatever. Receiving and inspecting. Assessing food quality, you want to look at appearance. Anything that's like moldy or has an abnormal color or odor should not be accepted. Of course, meat, fish, or poultry should be rejected if the texture is slimy, sticky, or dry, or if it has soft flesh that leaves an imprint when touched, or if it has an abnormal or unpleasant odor. You definitely want to label any food that's not in its original container that you might not be able to say what it was. Food labels should include the common name of the food or a statement that clearly and accurately identifies it. So, but if it's obviously, new boiled potatoes, I don't think you have to put that on there. But if it's especially if it's a puree food, you definitely would want to label it. This is for retail sale. So we're going to skip this. Date marking. This is important. Ready to eat TCS food, time temperature for control food, must be marked if it's held for longer than 24 hours. The date mark must indicate when the food must be eaten or thrown out. So, say you're going to have potato salad for supper tomorrow night. You would, and you've mixed it up the day before in the morning because you want it to be good and cold, right? That should be marked with a date when it should be eaten or thrown out. It could have a prepared date on there, but it has to have the throw out date. And usually that would be 7 days from when it was made. Some kitchens will say 3 days, but the food code will allow 7 days from when it was made, if it's made in your kitchen. Now, a commercial kitchen will have usually have an expiration date, and you could, I think we're going to get into that in a minute, and that's handled a little bit differently. But if it's made in the kitchen, and say you had pudding for lunch today, and you have a few servings left over, and you want to be able to use them maybe on some snack trays or something, you would have to label that pudding because you're going to hold it for more than 24 hours. You'd have to label it when it's got to be thrown out. And whatever the kitchen is, usually it can be up to 7 days. But a lot of kitchens will just say 3 days because they don't want their refrigerator all jumbled up with stuff. Now, ready-to-eat TCS food can be stored for only 7 days if it is held at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. And the count begins on the day the food was prepared or a commercial container was opened. For example, potato salad was prepared and stored on October 1st, would have a discard date of October 7th on the label. So you can have the day it was prepared, but you've got to have the day it's going to be discarded. Now, commercially processed food has a use-by date. Now, if it's less than 7 days from when the date the container was opened, then the container should be marked with that use-by date. In other words, like if, say you opened up a thing of pimento cheese on the 1st of August, and the use-by date is August the 3rd, well, you got to use it by August the 3rd. So it's only like 3 days. But look at there's a section on this in the food code, and just be sure you read that because it's a little confusing. The commercial food they're a little bit more lenient with, but the stuff made in house, much more specific. Combining food. When combining food in a dish with different use-by dates, the discard date of the dish should be based on the earliest prepared food date. So, like if you had shrimp and sausage jambalaya that was made on December 4th, the shrimp has a use-by date of December 8th. The sausage has a use-by date of December 10th. The use-by date of the jambalaya is December 8th because that's the first thing that's going to go out of date, right? Okay. Rotation, first in, first out. You identify the food items used by date or expiration date with the earliest used by or expiration date in front of the items with the later ones. A lot of times you'll see when people get deliveries, they'll put like the newest delivery toward the back, and then your oldest delivery toward the front. But sometimes, if you look at if it's something that does have a use-by date, it might be that it's the opposite. Depends on what's going on there. Especially in a high-risk population, you want to throw out food that's past its manufacturer's use-by expiration date. Now, on things like canned items, I'm not going around looking on canned items that much as far as expiration dates when I go do a survey. But we had one situation where you have to have emergency food. You need to have like at least in Alabama you have to have at least 3 days of emergency food in case of hurricane or whatever. You can use up all your other food first, but then you're going to have to you may have to depend on those last 3 days with canned food, like canned chicken and dumplings or whatever. So we asked to see the emergency food stores. So take me back there. And there was actually a can of a tomato product. I think it was like ravioli or something. I don't know. Anyway, it had burst open and had actually dried up. I mean, it was like black stuff. And you start looking at those cans and like they were like 2 or 3 years out of date. So that's, in that case, yes, I would use the expiration date, okay? Because then you start saying, well, what's the danger in this? So, it means you're going to have things you can't use in an emergency. That's what that means. So, but that was an unusual case. I mean, you'll see all sorts of stuff. So always something that comes up. Temperatures, you want to store TCS food at an internal temperature of 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower, or 135 degrees Fahrenheit or higher. And of course, store frozen food at temperatures that keep it frozen. Now let's say you walk into a place and they've been getting a delivery, they've been working on, they've been working on lunch or whatever, and that refrigerator door's been open. And you look at the refrigerator temperature and it's 46 degrees. Well, that's too hot, right, for their walk-in refrigerator. So what you're going to do is check. You can either come back and check later, or you can say, well, let's check a carton of milk or a carton of yogurt and just see what the internal temperature of that food is. And if it's 41 degrees or lower, you're good. Because it's like they were going in and out of the refrigerator. And that's why the refrigerator temperature's gone up. Okay? So that's one way you can deal with that. You can either come back and check it later, or you can check the internal temperature of a food item in there. And when you go in the freezer, the main thing is it frozen solid? And also another thing you're going to look for when you go into a refrigerator, if you start seeing, there are fans in the back, if you see a lot of black residue build up or like spots of black on the ceiling, you might ask your manager, whoever's touring with you, to maybe can they get a napkin or something and see if that comes off. Because if that comes off, that's mold. And then you can't say that's mold, but you say, so what is that? Get them to tell you what that is. And that's your interview. Okay? Because you can, that's not good. And in a produce refrigerator, sometimes you'll see that. Because it should be cleaned on a regular basis. Now the fans itself, maintenance should be cleaning that for them on a regular basis. Because you don't want to be cleaning that when it's running. Temperatures, you want to make sure storage units have at least one air temperature measuring device. It must be accurate to plus or minus 3 degrees Fahrenheit. And the device should be placed in the warmest part of the refrigerated unit and the coldest part of the hot holding unit. So that's usually by the door. Okay? So a lot of times you'll have on a walk-in refrigerator, you'll have an outside dial, but you also should have a thermometer inside. So you can check. You have a double check. Temperature guidelines. Don't overload coolers or freezer. Definitely don't want to see aluminum foil on the racks because that's going to impede the airflow and make it so it can't properly cool. So your temperature danger zone is between 41 degrees Fahrenheit and 135 degrees Fahrenheit. It's either got to be hotter than 135 or colder than 41. Storage location. Food should be stored in a clean, dry location away from dust and other contaminants. To prevent contamination, never store food in these areas. Locker rooms, dressing rooms, restrooms, garbage rooms, mechanical rooms, under unshielded sewer lines or leaking water lines, or under stairwells. Okay. Supplies, store all items in designated storage areas and store items away from the walls, and they should be stored at least 6 inches off the floor. So if you see something, if you see food stored directly on the floor, that is a problem. That is definitely a problem. It's one thing if they've just gotten a delivery, they bring the stuff in, on a hand truck, and they put it right there, and the staff has to put it up. That should be put up fairly soon. But that's okay. But if you see stuff in the storeroom directly on the floor where it's obviously been there, they haven't just had a delivery made, that's a problem. And the reason for that is it's like when you mop and sweep the floor, you got to be able to mop and sweep the floor. And it's going to get contaminated with that, among other things. Even single-use items like sleeves of cups and gloves, that should be in its original packaging, and it shouldn't be stored on the floor either. You want to store food in containers intended for food. You do not want to empty your bag of rice into your old container that you use for dish detergent. I mean, you just don't do that. You never use empty food containers to store chemicals or vice versa. You don't put food in empty chemical containers. You want to use an appropriate container that's durable, leak-proof, and able to be sealed or covered, and that's ideally washable. Cleaning, you want to keep all storage areas clean and dry. Clean up spills and leaks immediately, because that's going to attract insects, vermin. I know I walked into one storeroom, there were like cake crumbs all over the floor. I thought, well, they'll clean this up. The next day I went in there, it's still there. They hadn't touched it. And supposedly they swept and mopped all the floors each day, you know. And the storeroom floors at least once a day, kitchen at least 3 times a day. But no. So you will see stuff. But in a storeroom that's not going to be good, because that's just going to attract mice and rodents and roaches and stuff like that. Clean dollies, carts, and transporters and trays often. Store food in containers that have been cleaned and sanitized, and store dirty linens in clean, non-absorbent containers or washable laundry bags. You'll see some linens. It depends on the facility. Preventing cross-contamination in a storage order. All right, your food. You want to store your food items in the following top to bottom order: ready-to-eat food, seafood, whole cuts of meat and pork, ground meat and ground fish, and then whole and ground poultry. And that's based on the minimum internal temperature, cooking temperature of each food. And the thing that's going to require the highest temperature is going to be poultry. It's 165 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. And of course, ready-to-eat food, you're not going to cook it all, so that's why it should be up to the top. Like that would be your strawberries, your lettuce, and stuff like that. Or you could just have a whole section of produce over here, and then you have your meats over here, and then your chicken would be on the bottom. All right. When prepping food, you want to make sure that all the surfaces, all the workstations, all the cutting boards, all the utensils are clean and sanitized. Wash, rinse, sanitize. You only remove as much food as you need from the cooler as you can prep in a short period of time, because whatever you take out is being exposed to the temperature, this unsafe temperature range. So you would take out batches to work on at a time. And also, after about a 4-hour period or less, you would wash, rinse, and sanitize your work utensils, cutting boards, whatever, again, because they've been touching the raw food or the food that would be potentially dangerous at a time temperature abuse situation. We want to return prep food to the cooler as quickly as possible. As far as additives, those should really be limited, and they're never supposed to use additives to alter the appearance of food. Some places will use a light bleach solution on the outside of meat so that it stays red, but then when you get into it, it's all dark on the inside. It might not be bleach, but it's something that makes it not oxidize. And sulfites rather, are no longer approved to treat produce with. They used to, in the 70s, they used it all the time, and people had reactions to it. And that's what for raw foods, raw vegetables and things like that. And another thing is food companies will use. They'll use a colored overwrap, like for meat. They use like a pink colored overwrap, and that's misrepresenting your food. So I would kind of stay away from that. Also, lights. Some restaurants are pretty dark, but anyway, you can't see anything in there. If food is not presented honestly, it should be thrown out if it's not correct. Food is thrown out in the following situations: when it's handled by staff who have been restricted or excluded from the operation due to illness. So if someone just got sick and they were working on something, they really should get rid of that they were working on. When it's contaminated by hands or bodily fluids from the nose or the mouth, like someone throws up. When it's exceeded the time and temperature requirements designed to keep food safe. Now, there are 4 methods for thawing food. How many people just put the food out on the counter if you have a roast? Don't do that. There's a better way to do it, okay? You can thaw it in the refrigerator, in the cooler. And you want to keep the cooler refrigerator at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. Or you can submerge food under running, drinkable water that's at 70 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. So basically, you would have the running water. You could have like a pan, okay? Put the food in there like it's, so you're trying to thaw a chicken, or you're trying to thaw a pack of one of those tubes of ground beef. You put that in the water, in the pan, and so you turn on the faucet. The water comes from the faucet. You can check with your thermometer. Should be 70 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. It's coming in there. The food is actually submerged in that water, and the extra water is flowing off the pan and down the drain of the sink, right? And that agitation and the water will thaw it out fairly quickly. And it's a lot safer. You never want to let the temperature of the food go above 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower for long. You never want to let it go above 41 degrees Fahrenheit for longer than 4 hours. That's a misprint on there. That or lower, that shouldn't be in there. Never let the temperature of the food go above 41 degrees Fahrenheit for longer than 4 hours. And then another method you can use is to thaw food in the microwave, but only if you're going to cook it immediately after thawing. So you wouldn't start thawing out a chicken in the microwave and then put it in the refrigerator, because the cooking process has already started. You want to go ahead and finish it up. Or you can thaw as part of the cooking process. Say you have a frozen hamburger patty, and you're just going to put it on the broiler pan and throw it in the oven. Or you could put it directly on the griddle. You want to give it plenty of time to cook if you do that, but yeah, you can do that. Or even something like fried squash. I mean, if you've got frozen battered squash, you wouldn't wait for it. You don't want it to thaw. You're going to put it right in there and cook it. So that's thawing as part of the cooking process. Now, frozen fish, if it's in a restricted oxygen packaging, it's got to be thawed carefully. You want to read the label, see what it says, how to do it. I don't think you're going to have that much of an issue with this in the nursing home, but if the label states that the product must remain frozen until use, then you remove the fish from packaging and before you start thawing it under refrigeration. Or you remove it from the packaging before or immediately after thawing it under running water. When prepping meat, seafood, and poultry, you want to use, of course, again, clean and sanitized work areas, cutting boards, knives, and utensils. And you want to prep your meat, seafood, and poultry separately or at a different time than produce. and remove only as much product as can be prepped at one time. Return raw product to the cooler as quickly as possible after prepping it. So if they're cutting chicken up, you wouldn't want to see like 20 fryers out there. I mean, 3 would, or 2, or 1 might be plenty. So it depends on how fast they work. When prepping salads containing TCS food, again, you want to prep the food in small batches. TCI is temperature, time temperature control for safety food. Prep it in small batches. Make sure that the leftover TCS ingredients like pasta, chicken, potatoes, whatever, have been handled safely by ensuring they were cooked, held, and cooled correctly. We're going to get into cooling here in a minute. And stored for less than 7 days at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. So you might have pasta that you cooked a couple of days ago, and you want to say, well, we're going to make pasta salad out of this. But it should have been, properly labeled as to when it should be thrown out. And you want to use it in plenty of time before it's going to go out of date, unless it's all can be used in one meal or something like that. And again, you'd remember when you're doing your date, you would bear in mind the use-by date from that pasta that you had cooked previously. That would be a determining factor. When prepping salads containing TCS food, consider chilling ingredients and utensils before use. Okay, so you're going to make tuna salad for lunch. The tuna fish is sitting on the counter in the storeroom. The mayonnaise is maybe in the storeroom, or maybe it's in the refrigerator. The relish might be in the storeroom, or it might be in the refrigerator. The more stuff that's at room temperature, the longer it's going to take for that to get down to 41 degrees or below. So it's really better sometimes for them to store things like tuna fish, mayonnaise, and relish. Just put it all in the refrigerator. Then it's nice and cold when you have to make the salad. Quick, easy. Because when you take it out and to mix it, that's going to lower the temperature. Raise the temperature. And you want to make sure it's cold enough for service. Okay. Pooled eggs. You don't normally see pooled eggs anymore. Pooled eggs has to do with getting a big bowl and cracking those eggs and putting them for the next day. Like when I first started out as a dietitian in the hospital, the morning cook, before she left in the afternoon rather, she'd start breaking those eggs, and she'd have a big old bowl of egg yolks, and she'd cover it up, roll it in the refrigerator. When she came in at 5 in the next morning, she'd scramble it up and have scrambled eggs. Well, now they have pasteurized eggs, pasteurized liquid eggs. So they can use those. We also have pasteurized eggs in the shell. You would use those if you're doing something like a fried egg, because it used to be that they didn't even want you to do soft fried eggs in nursing homes because of the danger of salmonella, because it wasn't fully cooked. And a lot of people like their eggs over easy, sunny side up. They want a fried egg. It's rare that they want it all the way done. So, we don't have to worry about pooled eggs, but you do want to consider using pasteurized shell eggs and definitely pasteurized egg products when prepping dishes that need little or no cooking. Okay? And of course, promptly clean and sanitize equipment used to prep eggs. Okay. So that's a picture of pooled eggs right there. When you're prepping eggs for high-risk populations, that's when you're going to want to use your pasteurized liquid eggs or your pasteurized shell eggs. Now you can use unpasteurized shell eggs, which are the regular shell eggs that we use probably at home, only if the dish is going to be cooked all the way through. And the way you can tell the difference between a pasteurized shell egg and an unpasteurized one, the pasteurized shell egg has a little stamp P on it, a little purple P, which means it's pasteurized. Do you know, like Eggland eggs? You know how they've got those little stamps? It's just like that. on each egg. A P for pasteurized. How they do that without breaking the eggs, I don't know, but they do. And if you were going to do pooled eggs, you want to use pasteurized shell eggs. Again, because of the danger of salmonella and the temperature danger zone. Okay. Prepping breaded or battered food. Okay, this is another thing. You want to prep. They need to prep the batter in small batches. Store unused batter Store that unused batter as quickly as possible. Throw out any batter or breading after a set amount of time, not overloading the fryer, and making sure items are cooked all the way through. A lot of times the breading is set up right there by the fryer, which is probably one of the hottest places in the kitchen. And they'll dip it, they'll bread it, they'll dip it again, and they'll throw it in the fryer. So you don't want to see this. They shouldn't have all of it out there. They should have batches of that breading and batter mixture, so that you don't have to worry about the time temperature as much. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll have like a bowl of like the batter, and especially if you were there, they'll put like a pan with ice underneath it to try to keep that batter cold. Okay. Now we don't have to worry about that. Okay. Produce. You want to make sure produce does not touch surfaces exposed to raw meat, seafood, or poultry. You understand that. That's cross-contamination. You want to wash raw produce thoroughly under water before cutting, cooking, or combining with other ingredients. Produce can be washed in water. Well, you're not going to see that here, I don't think. Water with ozone. When soaking or storing produce in standing water or an ice water slurry, do not mix different items or multiple batches of the same item. That, for example, if you were doing like radish roses, which they might do that, they're suggesting that you do one item at a time, like radish roses, celery fans, whatever, or whatever they're talking about. Those are the examples I can think of. One of the problems with cantaloupe, and we're talking about the melons, we talked about cutting through it, is one of the things that people used to use, I know, was for fertilizer was chicken manure. And if you think about the way a cantaloupe is and it grows on the ground, that's one of the reasons why the bacteria, it kind of gets in all those little crevices and all that, and that's one of the dangers. That's why once you cut it, you want to keep it cold. Keep it out of the danger zone so the bacteria can't grow. Some people will actually put it an uncut melon in a special type of sanitizing water to try to help clean that, but still, you still want to maintain the temperature once you cut it. Okay. All right. Refrigerate and hold sliced melons, cut tomatoes, and cut leafy greens at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. And you'll see a lot of cut items in the grocery stores now. And actually, facilities buy a lot of pre-cut lettuce. Sometimes you'll see the pre-cut melons. And you don't, for a high-risk population, they should not be serving raw seed sprouts. Now, the canned bean sprouts, like for Chinese, the old-fashioned Chinese chow mein dishes, I think those are okay because they're not raw. They've been somewhat cooked and they're canned. But raw seed sprouts are dangerous.